just told one of my favorite stories that you shared with me the other day about the experience in what you were seeing in Spain. And by the way, I've done work there, and I've done work in South America, and I hope my listeners will understand I'm not taking a shot at Catholic Christianity, but in many historically Catholic countries, there is this ethical view of Christianity, this religious view of Christianity, and very little understanding of the reality of being somebody who is cast entirely on the mercy and grace of God. That's what you just pointed out. Your
Mm-hmm.
life made them ask questions that gave you the chance to answer it with the gospel of grace, which is a
Right.
beautiful thing. And people are hungry for that. Their souls thirst
Yeah.
for that. So it's a great story. You shared it when we were talking earlier this week, and I thought I was hoping you'd share that. I'm glad you did. So, Bill, talk about for just a minute the integrated life, because you don't. And you and I, Bill alluded earlier. I'll jump back a second. We both, when we met, we were both connected to a very, what I would call, a super spiritual institution. I was a student and graduate. Bill was an adherent, and we we paid a terrible price for that connection. Not so much with each other, but with
But
this institution, because it was so unreal.
hmm
With good people, good folks who love the Lord, but
yeah.
they just found themselves unable to see how Christianity and the real world work together. And so
Mm.
they lived a kind of hyper separatism that was unhealthy, to say the least. Both
Yeah.
of us, God has been merciful to us and has led
Yeah.
us into not a living of the world, but certainly learning how to live in the world in what I term integration. You may have a different term,
Yeah.
but that we don't have a sacred secular dichotomy in our thinking about life and work and ministry. We see it truly as a whole. But talk about how you got there, but more importantly, how that works out in your day to day life and work there at the university.
Yeah. Well, let me go back, and I'm gonna quote you on something I'm sure you've forgotten, but it's one of those things that I
If
remember.
I like it, I'll own it. If I don't like it, I'll just say you're an old man with a bad memory.
No, you'll actually probably love it, and even though you've forgotten it, you'll probably say, "Oh yeah, I remember that." But when we were basically, in your early Christian desire to grow, it's easy to be enamored by someone who you think is super spiritual. And that was the way this group we were in had some folks that were presenting themselves that way. And so they had sort of their own sort of schema for how you become like them. And in this particular, there's all kinds of variants of this out there, but this particular group fell generally into what probably would call pietism. And and I remember once, Mike, you said, we were just struggling with how wretched we felt as Christians or whatever. And you said, you know what our problem is, Bill? Our God lives in the prayer closet. In other words, this particular group really emphasized sort of the internal how you feel about your faith, really to the exclusion of what Paul talks about when he says the goal of our instruction is love from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. And so the question is, on one hand, there's certainly the internal part where we come to really understand and believe in the love that God has for us. And that's, by the way, a lifelong process. I'm delighted to say that I grasp that so much better now than I even did 10 years ago when I'd been
Yeah.
40 years in the faith. And but then it begins to move out into, so how do I express this? And there's the ways to do that are so much broader than just formal, preaching and teaching in the context of the church. Again, those are important things. We highly value them.